Hello everyone, good morning. My name's Elise James and I'm the facilitator for today. We are expecting quite a few people to join further. Based on the events that we've been running earlier this week and last week, we are finding that people are joining slightly late as they're moving from classes generally or other meetings. So we may find that other people are going to be joining us in the next 10 minutes or so. So apologies if that causes any disruption. We're not necessarily going to have lots of introductions. Thanks for those of you that have put your camera on. Chris, I can just see you there with a pillar behind. Hope you're all right. Others, if you want to put your cameras on just for that kind of initial introduction, that would be great so that we can see you all, just at least to start, so we know who it is that we're going to be talking to throughout the session. That would be great. Just to point out, you've probably got a message to say that this is being recorded. So we're recording this and we're going to make it available. So if you want to share it with colleagues or if you want to listen back, then there'll be an opportunity to do so. So the recording will be made available to you, and the slide deck we're using will also be made available to you in the next week or so. My colleague will be making arrangements for that. I understand that she sends out an email to send those details to you. The colleague I'm talking about is Abby Stewart, so you can see the name there on the tiles. She's here in a kind of technical observation capacity. She's just there in case we need anything. I'm also joined today by Sarah Bradley, who you can see, who's got the AOC backdrop. She's one of the senior advisors. I'm not sure of the exact job title anymore, but Sarah, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself and your role? Because I think people on the call may well be interested in those in your role and similar roles.
I am one of the lead advisors for the T-level transition program and the T-level program at AOC. So last year we combined both teams, the transition program and the T-level. So I work on those. So I'm looking forward to the session today for the hospitality and catering.
Great, thank you. And just to point out, so each provider has an advisor that is allocated to them, and they are there to offer support. So if you haven't yet met your advisor, then you might want to speak to your transition lead or your T-level lead, or it might be the same person, because if you feel that you would benefit from speaking to the advisor and finding out more about the kind of support that's available, then your transition lead or your T-level lead should be able to have that contact and make that contact for you, or give you their contact details so that you can certainly engage with your advisor, because they're keen. Obviously, that's their role, is to give you some advice and support to help you as you prepare and implement your T-levels and your transition program. So we're focusing today on the T-level transition program, and this is
Elise, can I just say, if people haven't got if they don't know who their advisor is, or they haven't got an advisor, if you want to just put that in the chat, and during the session I'll try and find out who your advisor is, so they can contact you. You can make contact with them.
Thanks for that offer, Sarah. That's I'm sure is appreciated by people, and actually that'd be useful, because my next point was to kind of say, just to check that you can use the functionality, you might want to introduce each other to yourself to the others in the chat, so we can see your names, which is great, but maybe if you put down which organization you're representing, because for some of you might find that there's another provider that's fairly close and it might be worth setting up some kind of network. Or if you don't want to work with somebody who's quite close for various reasons, you might see, oh, actually somebody on the other side of the country, particularly where it seems, oh, that sounds really nice and sunny or hilly or flat, whichever you prefer, that might be worth a visit. It'd be useful to be able to look at that. And if you're not used to using Zoom, you might want to check out the reactions buttons, because that's really helpful if you want to make a contribution. And we're really, really keen that you do make a contribution today. So you might want to find the hands up. So you should be able to see that there's reactions buttons, and in the reactions you can put hands up if you want to say something. or thumbs up if you want to agree, which is really helpful if other people are making comments, or Chris, if you just want to celebrate. Exactly. Use that kind of popping thing, whatever it is. So that's great. So thanks for that. So this is a technical focus group. So the type of events that we have that are labelled technical focus group are for the teachers. So this isn't aimed at the transition leads or your T-level leads. It's aimed at the people that are going to be delivering the content, the technical content, the kind of catering and hospitality specific content relevant to a particular T-level route. Okay, so any other types of events, and there's lots of events and lots of support that the AOC provide, those are available for different types of roles. So we're really focused on the kind of technical side that we're looking at today, and you'll find out throughout the day and towards the end of the day the other kinds of events that we can offer, because this is about getting teachers to talk to each other about how they might teach the technical content of the T-level transition program. So we're going to spend a little bit of time this morning looking at exactly what the TLTP, T-level transition program, is. You should have received a slide deck giving you that information with a link to the framework for delivery, which is where you find all the details about the program. But we're going to give a quick overview about what that is. So please do ask questions if you're not sure. And then the bulk of the session is to focus on the national technical outcomes, because that is where the kind of technical content comes in. So this is where your kind of specialism in relation to catering, particularly catering and hospitality more broadly, comes in. And we're going to focus on the outcomes themselves, so those statements that are outcomes, and then look at the teaching and learning associated with the content. So please do use chat if you've got any questions, or put your hand up, or let me know that you've got a question to ask. So it's really important that you do engage, and if there's anything that you don't understand, that you ask questions. But remember, the focus really of today is on the national technical outcomes rather than the bigger picture. We're only looking really at the bigger picture to put it into context. So depending on the numbers, we potentially will have some breakout rooms so you can have small group discussions. But if we've just got those of you that are here today, I think with 5 we can manage as one group. We don't necessarily need to go into breakout rooms, but we'll see who turns up throughout the session. So there are some presentations, but a lot of it should really about discussion, you coming up with ideas, you learning from others. One of the reasons that Sarah's on the call is she's going to be taking notes. Yes, there are recordings, but she's going to be taking notes of the kind of key points that are raised. This is because we put together a report at the end of it. We share some of that report with you as providers. That's available for people that maybe didn't attend, so that they understand what the key points were, but also so that we can share some of those key points with the department. We don't specify Shane at such and such a place said this, but we do point out these are the kinds of concerns that are coming out, or the opportunities that providers are identifying, and therefore from a departmental point of view, how can we support that? How can we support providers moving forward? So it's really important that they understand exactly what are the kind of concerns and, as I say, opportunities or challenges that people are facing when they're looking at delivering these NTOs, in particular, the national technical outcomes. So that's an overview of who we are and where we are and what we're planning for today. Everybody happy? Anybody unsure about where we're going and what we're doing today? And the fact that we're focusing on catering and hospitality, we've not got anybody here who's an engineer and thought they were coming for engineering or creative or something. All good? Okay, so as I've mentioned, the aims of today, yes, to provide some information on the framework for delivery, which was revised. For those of you, you're probably not delivering it yet. So the fact it's a revised delivery framework probably doesn't mean anything to you because you're delivering this from brand new. But predominantly so that you can explore the NTOs and think about teaching, learning, formative assessment, and also to start thinking about next steps. So our understanding is that nobody is delivering this transition program at the moment because the T-level doesn't start from next year. So just checking, does anybody think that they are, or is anybody actually delivering the transition program for catering and hospitality at the moment? Right. Great. Okay. So what we're looking at then is supporting you with your planning rather than your implementation. So let's look at the TLTP, just pointing out some of the key principles and the purpose. So the overall purpose is shown on there. And the key thing about this particular study program, it's a very specific study program that has been designed for a specific purpose. And the purpose of this study program, compared to other study programs that you may or may not be offering, is that this one has been designed to prepare students primarily for progression to a T-level and success on their T-level. You may be offering this in the future, okay? And it's important, therefore, to be aware of this purpose. You, your curriculum lead, others within the college may say, and we know that this is happening with some providers, is this becomes the level 2 study program. And therefore, there may be students on that program who don't see that their natural progression is to a T-level, but that is something for you to consider how you organise it to support their needs. One of the benefits of this program is there's a lot of flexibility that is included within that. Unlike other study programs, which are guided by quite a large qualification, and therefore it's the qualification that guides what you're doing, this one doesn't have that requirement for a large qualification, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. So the whole basis of this study program is to prepare students for a T-level. What many providers have said, though, is actually this is about preparing students for level 3 learning, good level 3 learning. So it's a good preparation for any level 3 learning, and in many respects it's a good preparation for any progression path that students might follow. But bear in mind, everything that I'm going to talk about today is because the program is designed for that particular purpose. If you decide to use it for a different purpose, you have to bear in mind that you're expected to meet these principles and to meet the requirements of the program. So because it's designed to prepare students for T-levels and success on their T-levels, one of the key principles is the program should prepare for what students will experience on T-levels. So one of the things that we find is good practice is where the development of the transition program is done in conjunction with the development of the T-level, so that there's similar thinking about how you're going to deliver the T-level, therefore how are you going to deliver the transition program, so that the experience of students on the transition program really does prepare them for that experience. And some of the requirements of the program actually build in some of the requirements of a T-level so that students have that experience. Part of the principles is that students develop core knowledge, skills and behaviours, and I'll talk a bit more about what they are, but the core knowledge, skills and behaviours are those that are nothing to do with catering and hospitality, because the purpose of the programme really is acknowledging that the reason that most of the students are not yet ready for a T-level is because they don't have these core knowledge, skills and behaviours, and therefore need to develop those. So that's about their attitude to learning, their ability to learn. So it's about ensuring that within the programme, there is that opportunity to develop those core knowledge, skills and behaviours, which don't naturally occur in other study programmes, because qualifications, particularly large qualifications, don't incorporate that kind of knowledge, skills and behaviours. And they focus very much on the technical side. So we'll talk a little bit more about what they are. Another principle is that students are clear about what they need to achieve in order to make that progress to a T-level. So this is part of what you need to consider when you're developing your programme. What is that programme telling you about the students and their ability to achieve, so that as you're planning your programme, you're kind of reverse engineering and saying, so what does that mean in terms of what students need to demonstrate? Is it sufficient that they turn up to every lesson on time and have completed and engage in all of the activities that you set them? Or are you requiring them to achieve a qualification? Are you requiring them to achieve a technical qualification? Are you requiring them to achieve that qualification at a particular grade? This is something that you need to consider, but you also need to consider that kind of equity issue in terms of what about the students that come direct from school that might not have a technical qualification, that might not have the equivalent of a higher grade in a technical qualification, but it is equivalent to GCSEs at grade 4 or grade 5 in terms of what it is that you're expecting. Are you expecting students who have done a transition program to end up with more than those that are taking direct entry? Or are you happy to accept less than those that are coming with direct entry from school because you've spent a year working with them? And actually, if they have developed those core knowledge, skills and behaviours, you know that they can then cope with the demands of a T level and you don't require something else. So this is part of the kind of planning and thinking about this in terms of the principles and how important is that kind of technical component that we're going to be focusing on. Another principle is that there should be a holistic integrated approach. So in a minute, when I show you the slides, and if you've had the opportunity to look at the framework for delivery, you'll know that there are these core knowledge, skills and behaviours, and there are 6 components of the programme. The expectation isn't that on a timetable, there's a nice little slot for every one of the core skills, knowledge and behaviours, skills areas, and for each of the components. But ideally, it's just on the timetable is transition programme, because ideally everything is seen as how it all works together, and that the technical component is a hook rather than a separate entity that separates the rest of the programme out. So I'll be talking a little bit more about that throughout the session. And ultimately, it's about helping students make the right decision about what they do after their programme, so that if they're not really suitable for a T level, they understand why they're not suitable and what other options are available to them. And that's part of the nature of the programme, is through monitoring progress, that students know all the way through what it is they need to do to improve, and perhaps whether or not T levels are the right things for them. And because of their experience, that they see whether or not it's the right thing for them as they go through it. So that's the kind of overview of the programme. Any questions? Can't see anything come up in the chat. Anybody before I look in more detail at what they are? Okay, you're all happy to listen. It's fine. I'm happy to talk. So what students can expect. So I've mentioned those core knowledge, skills and behaviours. And to get more detail, have a look at the framework for delivery. So you'll have been sent details about where you can access that framework for delivery, but have a look. It is around 40 odd pages, but actually it's more kind of double line spaced. It's not that difficult to read. And for each of these 5 key areas, it gives a little bit more detail so that you can see, and as many providers have said, yes, this is just about good learning, good support for students. So this is what we call the donut diagram. You're catering, you can see that. And the 5 skill areas that are shown in there. So as you can see, positive attitudes and behaviours, you can see how that should be holistic. You can't have that on a timetable, but it is thinking about how do you develop positive attitude and behaviours? How do you develop behaviours? You can't just say to people, you're expected to turn up on site. You're expected to be positive. You're expected to be resilient. You're expected to collaborate. They need to learn how to do that. They need to develop the skills to be able to do that. So catering is the hook that you can do. That's partly what you do in catering. You've got them in the kitchen. You're teaching them the positive behaviours all the time, aren't you? You're teaching them about professionalism, about the importance of being prepared, having their uniforms ready, not messing about. It's too unsafe. Not messing about with knives, not messing about near hot equipment, or when they're carrying heavy equipment. So a lot of those kind of positive attitudes and behaviours that you'll find out about in the framework delivery naturally come through the kitchen experience that they're having. So automatically you can see how a lot of that is what you do already, and that's part of being that kind of holistic programme. English, maths and digital skills. We know that for most students, the reason that they're not on a T level is because they need to resit the maths and English to get the entry requirements to get them onto the T level. And that does need some time independently learning and preparing for their GCSE resits. But what we're also expecting as part of that holistic integrated approach is that those English, maths and digital skills come through their learning about catering. And again, some of that you're naturally covering in terms of maths. If you're looking at them ordering, if you're looking at them looking at portion control, if you're looking at them adapting menus for different numbers, if they're looking at anything in relation to nutrition and the nutrition requirement and the calorific content, especially now that it needs to be in menus. So there's a lot of maths naturally in there. There's potentially English naturally in there if they're presenting their menus. There's communication because they have to work as teams naturally in the kitchen environment. So that kind of oral communication, but also potentially look at other communication skills, other math skills, and the digital skills. So increasingly, you'll know that there's a lot of kind of digital aspects to catering that you can start to look at how you can bring that in to the subject that makes that work. Skills for successful study, including preparation for assessment. So again, something naturally that you're doing, but the T-level assessment is different. So thinking about how are you going to bring that into the transition program delivery, ideally through the catering and hospitality NTO content is partly what you're looking at. How do you develop their ability to be independent learners? How do you develop their transferable skills through catering and hospitality, their ability to research, their ability to really work together as teams and collaborate, and thinking about what that means from an independent learning point of view, being critical thinkers, being analytical, being evaluators, being self-reflectors. So how you bring that into your delivery is a critical bit. Knowledge and skills for the workplace. So most of you have got students probably that will be timetabled to work in your kitchens, which are designed to reflect kitchens in real working environments, because most of you will have some kind of restaurant facility or facility where people are consuming the outputs from the kitchen where the catering takes place. So you're already introducing them to that, but looking again at what that might mean. So the knowledge of the workplace, the different types of kitchen environments, the different type of service environments that they may experience when they're out on work experience, because ultimately that is also part of what they'll do. And then the final bit, which is about the technical knowledge and skills. So the technical bit that is specific to catering, that's the bit that's different to every other transition program. Okay, so those are the kind of skills areas. And as I've said, the framework for delivery will tell you more about what that involves. And then what you're expected to deliver through a holistic program, which is demonstrated by this Venn diagram that shows how they can overlap. There are 6 components. So of those 6 components, 2 are kind of like wraparound. Pastoral support, which may well need to be separate, but can also be part of the delivery of the technical component, because we've had that with one provider in particularly for another route for construction, where the pastoral support comes because they have coffee time. They have the kind of construction site coffee breaks, where they all sit around reading the local paper, the red top paper, which is stereotypically what you find on a construction site, and they just have a chat. And that's part of their pastoral support, because that's what's encouraging the students to open up. And it reflects what happens in the workplace. So that's just one example of how it doesn't have to be necessarily a kind of formal tutorial session in that respect. And the diagnostic monitoring and guidance, because that should apply to all of the components. And the idea of the diagnostic bit is, yes, that happens early on, but that shouldn't stop after week 1 when they've done their BKSB or whatever it is that you're using for your maths or your English tests. But you're constantly using diagnostic and monitoring tools to see how students are progressing, what progress they're making against not just any qualification requirement, but against those 5 key skill areas that we've just been talking about. So it's about more than a qualification. Personal development and enrichment as a component. We are finding there's providers that do put that as a separate hour or 2 hours on a timetable. But again, ideally, it's something that is part of a holistic program that's part of the delivery of the technical component. English, maths and digital. Yes, we are aware there's lots of providers that are giving a lot of time, more time than they would normally give in a study program to English and maths particularly. Not just that so that students pass and get a grade 4 or a grade 5, but actually that they learn what they need to learn in terms of English and maths to prepare them for their T level. So really, really critical difference here between what the transition program can offer in terms of English and maths and what other study programs can offer. But remember also how important it is, not just that they have separate lessons, but it's part of an integrated approach. They should have experience of the workplace, and ideally students get some kind of experience outside of the college, because again, that's what prepares them for the T level when they have to do their minimum 315 hours out in a workplace, so that they learn from that experience of having to get up, get the bus, get to somewhere on time, work split shifts, work late shifts, work whichever requirements there are, work in an environment that's not familiar to them, with people that are not familiar to them, learning to really interact and establish rapport and engage and be part of a team that they're new to. So really important aspect. And then finally, there's the technical knowledge and skills component. So the weight that you give to each of those, the flexibility is that potentially different students have different weightings, because different students might not have accessed their T level for different reasons. Some might not get on the T level because they didn't have the maths and they did have their English. So therefore, they may want to spend more time on other components, not the English, maths and digital skills components. They may want to spend more time on the technical knowledge and skills, or they may want more time looking at things like personal development and enrichment, because really what they need is much more about developing their interpersonal skills and developing their transferable skills and developing their skills for successful study from the core KSBs. So the weighting that you give may be different to different students. So you might start with one set program, but the expectations is that it's bespoke to particular individual needs of students. So something for you to take into account as you look forward. So before we look in more detail at the NTOs, which relate to the technical knowledge and skills, anything that you want to ask, because really this is now where we get into the nitty-gritty of the technical knowledge and skills component. So before we get into that, anything you want to ask, anything you want to ask each other, anybody at the minute wanting to say what their thinking is around what the whole program is, or are you all beginners? You've not really got to that point yet. Anybody want to comment on where they are in their thinking of the program as a whole? Okay, great. At some point, we're going to ask you to start talking, but I've still got a bit more presentation time. So I'm going to talk about the NTOs, the National Technical Outcomes now. So these relate to the technical knowledge and skills component. So the idea of that particular component is to gain a broad introduction to a student's chosen T-level route through industry relevant technical knowledge and skills. So the route here is catering and hospitality, and the T-level that they will be progressing to is catering. That is the only T-level, and therefore the focus of the content is catering. The extent to which you want to bring in broader hospitality is up to you, because one of the benefits of the transition program is the flexibility for you to add to the technical knowledge and skills if you feel that a great way to develop some of those kind of positive attributes and their personal development is, for example, by doing hospitality, by bringing in food service, then that's an opportunity for you, and that's something that you can do. So that you've got lots of flexibility here in terms of exactly what it is that you need to cover. And that's the purpose of the technical knowledge and skills. It's a strong motivator for students. Students will have said primarily they want to do the T-level in catering, but they haven't met the requirements from your perspective for a number of reasons. They don't want to spend a year learning to learn. They want to spend a year preparing for the T-level in catering. So this is supposed to be all of that other content, but delivered through catering content, so that they are motivated to learn and develop those attributes and develop those kind of core skills that we were talking about earlier. One key thing is it is not expected to be the largest part of the program. So we said in the previous slide, it's up to you how do you weight each of these components. But technical knowledge and skills is not expected to be the largest component. So if a study program is 540 guided learning hours, then we're saying it should be 270 maximum if it's not the largest. Okay, so really thinking about exactly how much of this technical content you want them to be able to learn to give you the time, if you want to have other technical content in addition, or you want to use the technical bit to bring in the other content. So if you're choosing, for example, a qualification that's 360 or 480 guided learning hours, you won't have the time to do the English, Maths and Digital, develop the positive attitudes and behaviours, to prepare them for the workplace, to do all the diagnostic monitoring and guidance that is needed. So you need to be thinking, if you're using a qualification, what qualification are you going to use? So the fact that, as Debbie was pointing out, you're new to this, everybody here is pretty much new to this because nobody's delivering it yet. And that's what we're talking about today. This is the kind of introduction to the NTOs to get you started in thinking. So the NTOs are the technical knowledge and skills. It's not expected to the biggest of the 6 components, but we do expect some people will use a qualification, some might not use a qualification. Some use a qualification that is technical, i.e. is catering. Others use qualifications that are not technical. So it might be they use a project qualification, or they use something like a essential skills qualification, or a vocational skills qualification, or a general employability qualification. So there's lots of different ways in which you can deliver this program. The key thing is to understand the requirements and then find a qualification that best matches those requirements, rather than this is the qualification that I want to offer. How am I going to get everything else to fit in? Because you may well find that if you choose a qualification first and then look at how you can map everything to it, you've actually got a qualification that's too big, because all of the extra things that you've got to cover, you've not got the time within the study program. So today is ideal for you, because this is the starting point in you thinking about exactly how you're going to be offering this. So this is why we're going to focus on these outcomes. So the national technical outcomes have been developed to provide some consistency across providers. So this study program is really open, as I've said, and I'll keep saying it's really flexible, which means that you can choose any qualification that you think is appropriate. But what we've learned is that providers want some consistency. They want to know, and employers want to know, well, as a minimum, what can we expect people that have done a transition program to have learned? So we've got this national technical outcomes to give you that consistency across the program. What we also have within the national technical outcomes, we've got the minimum content, but we've also got suggested additional content. Now, it's only suggested because you are subject experts. You could probably come up with other ideas of additional content, but we've organized that content into what we're calling breadth and depth. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But that's that bit where you can then come together with a much more bespoke program to meet individual learning needs by adding technical content, but also technical content that you think is great in order to bring in some of the other components. So, for example, as somebody's mentioned about food service, it may well be that when you look at the breadth and depth section, you'll find that there's reference to that, because that's a really good opportunity to further enhance their professionalism, to further enhance their oral communication skills when they're talking to customers, to develop customer service skills, to develop their understanding of the role of the kitchen in terms of the experience of the customer, and get that much more holistic view about how hospitality works in general. So understand why you might be looking at bringing that in as extra. But remember, you must cover this as a minimum. So when, again, you're looking at your qualification, which qualification best covers the minimum rather than which one best brings in the food service? Because if you're bringing in the food service and you're not covering enough of the catering content, you're going to have additional time to be able to cover all of the extra content. And this is a critical thing when you're talking to your curriculum leads as well, and thinking about exactly how much time are you giving me to cover this content? Because often, if your transition lead is compartmentalizing everything, you're just left with the time for delivering the qualification. So you need to make clear just how much time you need, if you've got a qualification, to deliver the qualification and the minimum content focused on those outcomes that we're going to be looking at today. So just in terms of the national technical outcomes, my colleague Abby has already put a link in the chat. For those of you that haven't already been able to access the NTOs, I recommend that you do that now whilst I'm talking about them, so you've got a copy of them in front of you. So either if you've printed off a copy, you've got a printed copy in front of you. If you can organise your screen so that you can still listen to this, you've still got Zoom open, but you've got the NTOs on the screen, you'll probably find that this next bit of the presentation makes a lot more sense. So the NTOs are organised into learning outcomes. Like most qualifications have learning outcomes. In catering, they are all performance outcomes. So all the learning outcomes are performance outcomes. Now, with qualifications, often we ignore the learning outcomes because we go straight to the assessment requirements and we don't look at what the learning outcomes are. And the key thing for the transition programme is the focus on learning, not assessment. Because from our perspective, and I'm representing the department here, it's really important that they develop the knowledge, skills and behaviours to cope with the T-level. If we focus too much on that kind of summative assessment, we're not focusing enough on learning. So the outcomes are really, really a critical part. So we're going to talk about the outcomes in a minute. So we start with 3 performance outcomes, and we call them performance outcomes because they are doing outcomes. They're not about something outcomes, they are doing outcomes. They need to perform. Okay, so all the outcomes are about doing. And the benefit of that, as you can imagine, is it means that on the whole, they're practical or applied. So they show the learning in context of something that should be motivating, engaging for students. Under those outcomes, you'll find that there's 2 columns. One is knowledge, one is skills. And if you've looked at the outline content for your T-level in catering, you'll see that the occupational specialism for catering is made up of performance outcomes, and for each performance outcome, a section on knowledge and a section on skills. So in terms of that philosophy of preparing students for T-levels, you've got the same approach to the way that the NTOs are written. They look like the outline content for your T-level in catering. So they're structured in the same way. So that should mean that you're delivering and preparing your students in the same way. So the technical knowledge is the knowledge they need to meet the outcome, and the skills are the skills that they need to meet the outcome. So the expectation is, in terms of delivery, it isn't, we're going to teach this in the way that we might teach a unit that has a series of topics and we teach it topic by topic. The expectation is, holistically, you combine theory and practice together in order to meet the outcomes. So they're developing the skills by learning the knowledge. They learn the knowledge through practicing the skills. So often a different approach to the way that a lot of qualifications are structured, which supports the learning. Also within the NTOs, we have a number of behaviours. So those are the behaviours that the employers said they thought fit well with the outcomes. So they're the kinds of behaviours that naturally you can develop through the delivery of the outcomes. Within the content, under the skills, you will find reference to English and Maths Level 2 content. So you'll find that there's some referencing, some mapping to GCSE and functional skills, English and Maths. That's where, under the heading of communication, you will find that there is skills, communication skills there that are referenced to GCSE English and functional skills English. And under numeracy in the skills section, you'll find that there's some skills, some numeracy skills that we'll be looking for them to develop, but they are referenced to GCSE English, GCSE Maths and functional skills in Maths. So early on in your planning, that should be a good indication for you to go to your English and Maths GCSE specialist to say, I've got to teach this in the context of catering. Can you tell me what the techniques are that I need to focus on so that I'm not teaching them something different to what they need in their GCSE or their functional skills, but I'm teaching it in a way that is relevant to catering, and I'm reinforcing or introducing something that you're going to teach later and later reinforce, so that the student sees the relationship between what they're doing in their GCSE or functional skills subjects and what they're doing in the catering as well. It's one of the things that we know through contextualization. It's really important that we're teaching them the same skills and techniques that they need for their GCSE. Otherwise, they become confused and can end up using the wrong skills and techniques in their GCSE exams, which means that they lose out on the marks. So this is about ensuring that through that delivery of that naturally occurring English and Maths content, you're delivering that way in a way that supports them getting their GCSE or functional skills qualifications as well. You'll also find there's reference to digital skills. So where it's appropriate, where it's naturally occurring, there will be reference to digital skills that can be developed in relation to that particular outcome. And what you'll also find is there's reference to either essential digital skills or functional skills ICT. So that's, again, an opportunity to link to a qualification, a digital qualification. It's only at level 1, but it still means that they'll have a digital qualification potentially that they can take away at the end of it. So you might need more time than is available in order to get that digital qualification, but it is something that is there. So that's the background to having the NTOs. So anybody want to ask generally about the NTOs? Have you been able to look at a copy and see what I mean by each of those headings and what they might mean? Because we're going to focus next on the outcomes themselves rather than the content. I'm going to look at the content in later in the second hour of this session, but we're going to start with the outcomes. But generally, any questions about the NTOs? Okay, right then, as they say in the Northeast, shy bears, but we're going to get you talking in a minute and me talking less. So let's have a look at the NTOs for catering and hospitality. So as I've mentioned, often we don't look at the outcomes when we're looking at qualifications. We go straight to the assessment requirements and start kind of thinking, what do I need to do to meet those assessment requirements? So the NTOs is content. Content. It's not assessment requirements. There's no assessment specified for this. It's not a qualification. It's content. To be fair, a lot of the content can be found in the GCSE for food and nutrition. That's a 1 GCSE qualification. The NTOs are designed to be delivered within 120 and 150 guided learning hours. So if you were to take 240 guided learning hour qualification, if it included most of this, then you've easily got the time to be able to cover this. A GCSE can be delivered in 120 to 150 guided learning hours. Okay. Thinking about qualifications. So the students are resitting their English and Maths because they need that to get on their T level. So that means ideally they get 2 GCSEs at the end of it. If you do a 240 GCSE qualification, that's 2 GCSE equivalent. So that takes them up to 4 GCSEs. Okay. If they did a project qualification, that's a half a GCSE. If they do an extended project qualification, that's half an AS or half an A level. So that's a level 3 qualification. But they've got 4.5 if you did a project qualification. Most transition program students already have GCSEs at grades 4 and 5. At least one. Some of them have 2 or 3. They just don't have the 5. They just don't have the English and maths. So you don't need a 4 GCSE size qualification because they're getting their English and maths. That's 2. So if you're thinking about having equity with what students who are coming straight from school will need to get onto a T level, start thinking about how your transition program is going to meet their needs. Okay, and therefore the large qualification isn't needed. When you take a smaller qualification, you could still have 480 hours of technical teaching time, because a 240 guided learning hour qual, maybe some additional time to do some hospitality and food service, time to bring in some of the English and maths contextualization as well. An opportunity there for you to be able to think about what that might mean, thinking about what the student experience is. So the outcomes, as I've said, there's no assessment requirement in these, except the diagnostic monitoring and guidance component says you are going to monitor student progress throughout their program. These outcomes are there because you are expected to teach students to be able to meet those outcomes. So again, if you're looking at qualifications, try and find a qualification that matches these outcomes so that what you're asking the student to do for the qualification meets the requirements of the NTOs. If it doesn't, then you're going to have to ask the students to do additional tasks. So understanding what these outcomes require is partly the starting point for when you're looking at qualifications. So the outcomes are, remember the performance outcomes, effectively the things you're going to ask the students to do to show that they can apply the knowledge that's listed under the outcome and demonstrate the skills that are listed under the outcome and the behaviours in a way that meets the outcome. There's no standard been specified, so you decide exactly what that would be. So the first outcome, design healthy, sustainable meals to meet specific individual needs. The second one, prepare healthy, sustainable dishes. Thirdly, cook and finish healthy, sustainable dishes. From a catering perspective, is any of those three, something that is, if you saw them, you haven't got a clue what that means? Do any of those where you haven't got a clue what that could possibly mean from a catering perspective? Great, sorted. So this is where we would normally now go into breakout rooms and have a discussion about, I'll show you what we're going to ask. So what would you ask students to do to confirm that the outcomes have been met? So essentially, how will you assess? How will you monitor progress against the outcomes? What will be the assessment task that you are going to give the students to be able to do, show that they can do that? So this is where you now do have to speak, because although I know a bit about catering, and I know Sarah knows a bit as well, because we've been involved in teaching things in relation to hospitality, and I also worked with the panel that developed the T-level content, you are the specialists. So what I'm interested to hear is the reality. Let's break this down. Let's turn this into something. What is the healthy and sustainable meal you might want them to design? And what are the specific individual needs you might want them to design their dishes for? Okay, so suggestions, people. This is where you turn your mics off, put your cameras on, and let's have a discussion. Who's got some ideas about outcome 1? Let's start with that, because we might feel outcome 2 and outcome 3 is, well, prepare that dish, now cook and finish that dish. Great. People, yes, thank you. Who wants to start with some ideas? Shane, you've taken your mic off mute. I'll take it that's where you've got something to say.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Go for it.
Well, it's screaming for a little research task, isn't it, on sustainability?
Okay.
Maybe we could, we're going to be working with the Marine Conservation Society at Cheshire College over the next 2 or 3 months. So there could be some sort of research task there, a healthy eating input, and then design a little menu maybe.
Okay. So the key thing there is you're talking about the teaching and learning to get them to the outcome.
Yeah.
And here it's, which is great, because actually that's what we do next. And this is about the outcome itself. So if you're working with the Marine Conservation Society and you're looking at fish, seafood predominantly, okay. So if you're wanting something where you're going to get them to design healthy, sustainable fish dish for a pescatarian, we've then got specific individual needs, haven't we?
Yeah.
And then they use what they have learned from their research about sustainability of different types of seafood in order to be able to come up with, and everything else that's in the content, in order to be able to come up with a design for the meal for that particular individual. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the kind of thing that we're looking at when we're looking at the outcome, that you're giving them a very specific scenario then, which effectively becomes the assessment, if you like, that you can use to monitor, can they design healthy, sustainable meals to meet specific individual needs? Okay, that's great. So we've got one idea there. Anybody got other ideas? Chris, you've taken your mic off mute. Are you able to?
Could we host some like theme events? Get them to sort of like, you know, come up with a theme event, host an event, but make sure that they're sort of meeting needs within the event. So we could put some, you know, different needs, dietary needs within the event.
Okay, so then designing the meals for the particular event, and then you're specifying, because it's only level 2, 1 or 2 specific individual needs that people have identified who would organise the event.
That's right. We'll start off from the beginning, planning the menu, doing some research, maybe take them to a sort of sustainable farm, look at some of the ingredients, and then sort of build that into sort of an event that focuses on sort of, you know, environmental sustainability factors.
Great. So again, you've come up with some really good learning activities. So you've got the learning activities.
Association, isn't there, that they can sort of, and there's a couple of restaurants that signed up in Birmingham to the Sustainable Restaurant Association.
So the key thing there, the key thing there is you're talking about the learning. We're focusing on the outcome. So if the outcome is design healthy, sustainable meals for this event for these 2 types of individual needs.
That's right, but then we could actually run the event and get the feedback.
The running the event we'll look at later, because the outcome is to design the meals for specific individual needs. So remember, we're focusing here on the outcome. So when you're coming up with ideas for learning, that's great, because that's going to be on the recording. That's going to be in the notes. So, and that's something we'll come back to when we look at teaching and learning, but try and focus on it as an outcome. What is the specific thing you're going to ask the student to do? So it's great, your idea about an event, but with specific individual needs. This is level 2 and you're monitoring progress. So you don't want to make it to level 3. You don't want to go too big and complex a scope. You're keeping it nice and neat and contained because it's level 2. Okay, so don't make it more complex than it needs to be. Danielle, you've got your mic off mute.
Yeah, so we do something similar when we're looking at individual needs and dietary requirements. So we give profiles, so we can give the learners maybe 1 or 2 profiles that they have to design a menu for, and then really that's the outcome in a nutshell.
Absolutely. So the profiles thing, and one of the benefits there, again, from a teaching and learning point of view, or the way in which you do that, where people have been talking about working with other employers, when you talked about profiles, I was immediately thinking about residential homes for the elderly, or children's homes, or homes for people that have particular therapy needs, or something along those lines, where you've got people with particular health issues.
And we find quite a lot of our learners, if they're doing work experience, they'll go into the local homes and things like that as well. So that can tie in with where they're at the moment, and they've got a bit of an insight. Whereas maybe if we've not been in industry for a while, they've got that little added bonus if they can tell us what they're actually doing at this moment in time, whereas we might be a bit out of the loop in that scenario.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, because when each of you have talked about kind of teaching and learning, you're all talking about employers. So there's an opportunity, isn't there, to bring that component that's about experience of the workplace. It's not just about having the time in the work experience that gives them experience of the workplace. Every time that each of you have talked about going out and visiting someone, you know, and thinking more broadly than just a restaurant, but who else is involved in designing healthy, sustainable meals to meet specific individual needs, you know, they are then having that experience of the workplace. So that is part of bringing that into your learning. And this is one of the benefits of the NTOs and the transition program. Often you don't have the time and the luxury to do a lot of that kind of working with employers when you're working with a qualification, because the focus is on getting that evidence all the time. Whereas this, you do have the time that considered before was a luxury to actually go and work with an employer and kind of see it through as a learning project where they come up with a design for the healthy meal. So the profiles thing is another thing. So it's kind of start with the individual needs and then think about where are the different contexts, like events, like different types of sustainability employers who are focused on a particular, trying to get a sustainability message across, because this is something that you know, young people really are quite interested in sustainability. So it's a really good hook for them from that point of view. Anybody got other ideas around what that outcome, the kind of, if you were writing an assignment, what is the key task essentially is what we're asking. So it's a great one, isn't it? Is here's a profile of someone in a residential home or someone that's had this particular issue. It's like they go to the gym and they've got a personal trainer, and the personal trainer's coming up with a healthy, sustainable meal to meet the needs of somebody in a gym. You know, so there's a real opportunity to start thinking more broadly. It might be somebody's just started working in construction on a construction site where they're doing a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of manual work, and they're going to be using a lot more calories than they're used to, and they need to have meals designed for them. So potentially there's an opportunity to go and talk to other departments within the college or your school and find out from them kind of profiles of different workplaces. You know, for someone who's going to be working in a kitchen, you know, getting them to work out what is the calorific requirements of someone who's on their feet, however many hours a day, constantly moving, you know, how many steps do they actually take? How many calories are using, so that they actually could start with design sustainable meals for them when they start to become more active and they're not sat, you know, in classrooms a lot of the time. What about from a kind of footballer perspective or another sports person perspective? So lots of opportunities to kind of look at it from that point of view. And again, something to be able to think about. So that's the design side of things. Yes, Laura, the nutritionists. That's the thing, is often if you talk to the kind of health department, they can come up with details about the specific needs that people might have that have got particular health issues that you need to think about. And one of the things about the elderly is the way that their calorific requirements change as they're older, and therefore the portion sizes change. So often that brings in the kind of maths, because you're then looking at, well, here are recipes that have been designed for people that are of a typical age and a typical activity level. Now redesign that for someone based on this particular requirement, and therefore they bring in the maths there. So they're bringing in ratios and percentages and proportion. So lots of things that you can bring in there when you're bringing in that around the individual needs. So thinking about that as your outcome. So you are going to be designing your own formative assessment, because this isn't necessarily going to contribute to any qualification unless you choose a qualification that requires them to design healthy, sustainable meals to meet specific individual needs. So you're going to design your own assignment. You're going to design your own assessment. The benefit of a transition program is, what does PASS look like? You decide. And it may be that you have that assessment of that first one early on, just to see how they're getting on. You're not expecting them to achieve any particularly high standard, but maybe you've taught them something. You want to see how they've learned what you've taught them and how they can use that when they're designing healthy, sustainable meals for individual needs. So you might have taught them about people with celiac, and therefore you get them to design just for that particular purpose, to see whether or not the bits that you've taught them they can actually use. And then maybe you do another one next term where you might make it a bit more open, where there's more of a profile, because you're expecting them to work out something about what those individual needs are. You're not specifying it. So you're seeing whether or not they can cope with something where they've got to work it out for themselves. So you're starting to see whether or not their ability to learn and apply that learning is coming in. And therefore they're showing that they're much more relevant to a T level. And then you might have it again in the third term, where you're really opening it up, as Chris was saying, to something that's a bit more open, like an event, where maybe they have to anticipate what the individual needs might be, and they're starting to think about that for themselves. So each time you're having that as something different. And the way that you're setting that up as the task, you decide they've done their learning. So this isn't about them learning necessarily. This is about them showing that they have learned. So it might be that you require them to do some research, but it might be that you're requiring them to use the learning, the handouts, in order to be able to do this. Okay, so it's up to you how you design that. And that's one of the things in our next events that we're having next term, where we're going to be looking at that in more detail. What do you think outcome 2 means? And how is it different to outcome 3?
Outcome 2 looks to me just as if it's a practical assessment type, rather than a research task or paper-based task.
Okay, yeah. And how do you think it's different to 3?
So you prep and then you cook and finish. They'd be quite similar to what we're doing in our VRQ level 2s at the minute. And with your sustainable aspect on your preparing healthy, you can do it as if it's sort of competition style, where you're looking at the weight of your spare ingredients or anything in your waste. Yeah. So that could be a sustainable angle on your preparation.
Yeah. But if you've already designed a healthy, sustainable dish, then the fact you're preparing that healthy, sustainable dish, you've already got the sustainability in, because you're not using the fish that's about to be extinct. You've chosen the sustainable. So essentially, you don't. Yes, there are sustainable practices that they can show, but don't get hung up on making it a sustainable dish, because if they preparing the one that they've designed in outcome 1, then it's already a healthy, sustainable dish.
Yeah, I think more from like costings as well.
Yeah.
The way that you're preparing your food. So if you're filleting, you need to make sure that you're taking all of the meat off the fish, and that sort of angle. And wastage really is massive for me when preparing.
Yeah. And that might be part of what you're expecting them to include when they're looking at the design of the sustainable meal. You know, when Shane was talking about the fish, are they doing something with the bones? Are they doing something with the skin? Are they doing something, you know, or are they just thinking that that's going to go in the bin? So are they showing that they're using that as part of the dish, or are they using it as something else that's a little bit else? So the difference, as you were saying, is really it's about the prep side. So the chopping, the filleting, and the using of the knife skills. And then the third one, which is around the cooking and the finishing, which is much more about the way it's presented on the plate. So you can have those as separate outcomes. okay? And they've been designed so that they can potentially work with T-levels if you wanted to have some common classes. So effectively, the transition program students are almost the commis chefs for the T-levels. They're doing their prep. So they might be prepping for something that's a bit more of a complex dish, and then the cooking and finish could be something that's separate, or it could be outcome 1 goes to outcome 2 that goes to outcome 3. So naturally, the way that I know that a lot of providers organise their kitchens is the prep is every time they're in a workshop, they're doing a prep, aren't they? If they're in the kitchen, because there's a service element to it, because they're a restaurant, they're doing the prep, they're doing the cook and finish. So it's almost every time they're timetabled to be in the kitchen for a restaurant service, they're doing outcome 2 and outcome 3. Would you agree? So it's that notion of formative assessment rather than summative assessment. So the whole idea of the NTOs is essentially they don't fail. They just, you give them feedback that says what they need to do to improve next time. So they can keep doing it again and again. And you can give them as much feedback as you want to. You're not restricted to the type of feedback because it's formative assessment. So quite a bit there for you to think about. And I know that, thank you, Sarah, you've been doing a lot of responding in the chat. So I need to go back and check on everything that's in there. We normally have a quick break at this point, just so you can get up and stretch your legs, and so I can get up and stretch my legs because I need to be able to do that. So we're just going to have 5 minutes. It's 11:07 on my computer, so we're going to come back in 5 minutes at 11:12. If you just want to take the opportunity, I might even look at see if I can get a kettle boiling within 5 minutes and make myself a cuppa as well. But we'll come back at 12 minutes past. I'll see you all soon.
Hi guys, can I just ask a question about that? It's Debbie Sherman.
Yeah, hi Debbie. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to get my head around this. I'm all new to this. It's the first sort of introduction of sort of T levels that I've had. I normally
Debbie, or
yeah, possibly.
Yes.
there we go.
Oh yeah, hi. Yeah, I've got my coat on at work because it's freezing. Yeah, I mean, I tend to do sort of level 3 here at the moment and sort of level 1, so I don't really teach on much level 2. So to get my head around this, we can run this alongside a qualification. So if we picked a qualification with some of the units, just out of interest, like an MVQ level 2, but we found some units on sustainability and healthy eating, we could do the 2 things together. So they would all get the transition, and then the ones that are capable would then move on to T levels after. Is that the kind of plan that you guys are thinking of? Because when our guys come in at 16, no way do they know whether or not they're going to go on to a 3rd year and do T levels at 16. They don't even know what they're going to be doing next week, let alone in a year's time. And my concern would be how, with our main cohort of students, we have about 50-60 level 2s coming in, how we would then streamline them into who was suitable to go onto a T level or wanted to go onto a T level.
Yeah, so that's probably something that you need to look at across the whole college.
Yeah.
And I don't know to what extent of the college you're already delivering other T levels and you've kind of T level lead. So do you know who your T level lead is in the college?
Yeah, Sarah's emailed me that. I don't know one of the guys, but I know 2 of the ladies. Yeah.
Okay, so your T level lead, firstly, should have a kind of plan for the curriculum as a whole, because of course this is within the context of everything is changing.
Yeah.
And over the next 3 to 4 years, everything is changing, and so the whole approach to IAG will probably need to change so that students are clearer about whether or not level 2 or level 3 is appropriate for them. So typically with catering, people start on a level 2 regardless, because to get their knife skills, to get that kind of background, and then they do a 1 year level 3 or something like that. What we're saying is the T level, which is a 2 year level 3 program, you take them beginners and you have 2 years to develop them. How you organize your program to develop that is up to you. So the T-level transition program is one type of level 2 study program that's going to be available in the future. Other level 2 study programs would be to do something like a City and Guilds or whoever, technical certificate or something along those lines, 360, 480 GLH, which is just focused on the qualification, and maybe and then they have to do maths and English alongside. So part of your curriculum lead or your overall curriculum leader will kind of have a view about how this is going to work in the future. So firstly, accept there will be people that will be coming straight from school going to the level 3, which is the T level, if that's what you're going to be offering. Some of those will want to do a level 3 T level, but they won't have what you require in order to get on that T level. Okay, which predominantly is they don't have the maths and English. Okay, predominantly. Others, it's particularly over recent years, it's things like they haven't got the maturity, they haven't got self-confidence, they're not ready for the requirements of an industry placement that lasts so long and is so important. They need a year of being in a much more supportive environment to get them ready for their T level. So if you've got 60 odd students, okay, then potentially you're going to have 2 level 2 programs, which is the transition program for those that have the potential to go and do a level 3, and those where probably they're not showing they've got the potential to do a level 3, because the level 3 in the future is the T level, and it's got quite a lot of theoretical content and quite rigorous level 3 assessment requirements. And therefore these are the level 2s that are probably going to go into work, whether it's an apprenticeship or they're going to get a job, and they're going to have 2 completely different programs. So that is the likelihood because of the numbers that you've got. But again, you need to speak to your lead, and then it's about you then, if that's what your curriculum offer is, working out what the difference is between that offer, so that you can say to students, based on your GCSE results or the interview that we've had and your aspirations, this is what we think is the best route for you. Others, it's what's routes for them. So it's about thinking about the bigger picture and not just what this program is.
Yeah, the trouble is thinking about the bigger picture. You know, they could interview very well, they could have done really well on their GCSEs, and then they come into college and their knowledge, skills and behaviours are not particularly good.
So if they've started on their T level, this is part of what you would need to look at, and you don't feel that they're making the progress that they should, then maybe they swap over to the transition program for another year and then go on to their T level.
Oh, so you could do that?
In the same way as you would at the moment. If they started on a level 3 and it wasn't working, you put them on a level 2, don't you? So it's not any different of that going forward. The bit about qualification, which others might be interested in and others might come in, please chip in. The key thing there, if you're looking at the qual, you don't need a qual that has sustainability content, okay? Because it's not important. If you're finding a qual to have the sustainability content, why? If the qual has got what you need anyway, why can't you teach the sustainability content without the qual? Why do you need a qual to teach the content?
Can I just make a point? If we're not doing a qualification, how will it be funded? Because the colleges won't run.
The transition program has its own funding code. So you're funded as the program. We're not saying you are allowed to not have a qualification. I'm not saying don't have one. What I'm saying is the sustainability aspect doesn't have to be in the qualification, because providing you teach the bit of sustainability that is in the content in the NTOs, that's all you need to do. So you don't need a qualification to know what to teach. The NTOs tell you what to teach.
As long as it's funded, because no college is going to run a course that's not funded, because wouldn't be able to afford to.
That's the thing, is the transition program is funded.
On that?
Go on.
what sort of funding is it on the transition? Obviously, we're
It's
going
the
to get
same as
funded
a
for that
study
1 week.
program. It's a study program funding. So the same as any other level 2 study program. So effectively,
we're on
you're
the
funded it
T-levels,
exactly the same way.
So the same as the technicals.
Same way. Yeah.
Same as the
So you'll
technicals.
need to speak to your leads, your senior leadership team, if that matters to you. But essentially, it is a study program like any other level 2 study program. It's just that when you enter it as their ILR, it has its own code. Okay.
But,
so
and we
whether
do,
or
we do
not,
all the
therefore,
assessment and working out.
yeah,
no
and if
actual...
you want a qualification as part of that, that's fine. The achievement of it is about what you have set the requirements at. So again, it's very different. It's a lot more flexible. And that's what we're saying. Look into the content, because the critical thing is that you are delivering those 5 skills areas and those 6 components and these NTOs. That's the requirement.
We talked about having to move people off the program, but can we move people into the program if they don't start on the transitional? Because sometimes you get people that come and they absolutely shine, don't they? School wasn't for them. They come to college, they shine in college.
Yeah, so you will have systems in place. So providing your systems cover the transition program, how you move people between, you follow your existing systems. So again, if you don't know how that's supposed to work, talk to your senior leadership team. They will be able to give you more information about what that would mean in terms of...
we do all that now, but it's just that this is a new thing, so things might change, mightn't they?
Yeah, it's not changed. No. And that's one of the benefits, of course, is a student that's on a transition program, because it's bespoke. If they got a job, they don't have to leave. They can keep coming in to do their English and maths. They can keep coming in to do some of the professional behaviours. You can chop and change their timetable. It's still there as part of that program. So you can be flexible to individual student needs. The student who halfway through says, actually, I'd much rather get a job at the end of this. I can't get a job at the moment. I'd much rather get a job at the end of this. Can I have more work experience time? Yes, you can. You can have more work experience time.
But they need to be working towards the GCSE English
and maths. They will. That's still a requirement for the funding.
Will there be any equivalents in the future? Because the best way in the world, when they're doing GCSE English, analysing a poem by Duffy or something isn't really relevant to working in the hospitality industry.
No, and that's why when you look at the NTOs, if you look at the NTOs and where there's English, when they're analysing a poem, okay, the skill of analysing the poem is a skill that you would want them to be able to do when they're analysing information that's about catering. So if you were giving them a document about sustainability, what you're wanting them to do is apply the techniques they've been given, the techniques, not the knowledge of poetry, but the techniques that they've been learning about analysing text. You want them to apply that to the analysis of the text that is catering related that you're giving them. But what you need to do is talk to the GCSE English team to say, what are the techniques that are used when they're analysing text? Because those are the techniques you want them to apply when they're analysing catering text, so that you're reinforcing what is different. So Shane, is the transition programme compulsory? Can learners go straight to a catering T level after their level 2 if entry requirements align? Absolutely, yeah. You don't have to use a transition programme. If you think it's better that they do, and remember the VRQs are only going to be around for the next couple of years or so, but if you want to use the VRQ and you want to carry on doing what you're doing, carry on doing what you're doing. If that is successful and you think that the VRQ will help students prepare for a T level, and that's the best preparation, then carry on doing that. That's absolutely not a problem. Nobody's going to come in and say, you've got 20 students on your T level that have come from your level 2 and you're not having a transition program, we're going to defund you, or we're going to put a black mark against your name. Nobody's going to say that, because you've found a way of supporting students to prepare them for a T level. It's not a problem. If you want to carry on doing what you're doing and you think that that's the right way to support students to progress to a T level, fantastic. It's not a transition program. It doesn't get funded as a transition program. It's funded and they enter in the same way as they always have done. Not a problem. Not a problem at all. Any other questions like that? Because it's really useful, I think, because many of you are starting out. Remember about these NTOs and the place of these NTOs, because that's the critical thing if you are having the transition program. But if you think you don't need a transition program to get students ready, that's all that you need. And then that you need to make that clear to your AOC advisor. Is that not right, Sarah, that you're not going to go ahead with the transition program?
Yes, and I think what's coming to light as well is that the people here on this call, you have all got T-level advisors, but they're working like with your T-level leads or T-level transition program leads. So I think you need to speak to the people, you know, within the college, and perhaps be invited to the next meeting for the transition programs. So I've let I think I let, was it Debbie, know who their advisor was, and I've got a couple more that I'll put in the chat. But I think you need to be having conversations with the people inside the college as well, and see if you can them and possibly be invited to the meeting.
Yeah, I think that's a critical thing, and it may well be that your college has already got a kind of T-level group, because we often find that in colleges, and it might be that you're not part of that group yet because you're a year away. So it's also worth finding out whether or not there's a group from different curriculum areas that are involved in the kind of discussing what's happening with T-levels, and also where there is already, if there is already a transition program in place for another curriculum area. So Debbie, the points that you were making about, you know, how do we decide who's on the transition program, who's not, if we're going to offer that, you know, how do we do that? Speaking to other people within the college. But if not, then perhaps speaking to your AOC advisor, who might put you in touch with another college where they have been looking at that, and there might be somebody else that you can speak to. And Sarah, you might want to talk about the other events that you've been running that they might want to come to, like the ones we were talking about at the beginning. Do you want to tell them about the other kinds of events?
I don't know if you've seen advertised, we've had several provider insight days this year, this term, sorry, and we're organising possibly 10 to 12 more in the second term, which really gives people such as yourselves the opportunity to come and see the colleges who have been delivering T-levels since 2020, 2021. You know, have a chat with the curriculum staff, have a look at the facilities, how they've spent the capital bid, how they've spent their specialist equipment allocation. So they're excellent opportunities to come and learn from people who have, you know, who have already implemented T-levels and the transition program as well. So I'll put a link in, or Abby, I don't know if you could do that for me, please. Just put a link in for the brochure, and all our events then are advertised there and on our website. So it's well worth looking at what's out there and seeing if you can come. I know times are hard in colleges for you know, for people's time and you know, and money, but it is worth. You'll get so much out of coming to a provider insight day.
Thanks, Abby, for putting that link in the chat. Okay, so hopefully you get an opportunity to look at that, and if you can take that link now, because obviously when the event finishes, you'll lose the chat. So having access to those resources will be useful to you. Before we go back to the NTOs, any more, because I think, you know, we want you to find this event useful. You know, to me, one of the starting points of you thinking about how you develop your program is to start with the NTOs, and then how do we build on that. But if you need to know what am I building it to, and getting a better understanding of that, then let's have a look at that now. Has anybody got any other queries or questions, or, you know, want to share their thoughts about what they were thinking of doing with their transition program going forward before we go back to look at the NTOs? Okay, so remember those outcomes, because if you're offering a transition program, you need to be monitoring their progress against those outcomes. So your quality team, if you've got a qualification that's part of your transition program, I'm sure they're going to be looking at how well students are performing against that in the same way as they do on other study programs. But they should be asking you about how they're progressing against these 3 outcomes as well. So remember, what these 3 outcomes mean is you're setting an assignment where you're asking students to design healthy, sustainable meals to meet specific individual needs. You're asking them to prepare healthy, sustainable dishes, and you're asking them to cook and finish healthy, sustainable dishes. And then you're monitoring how well they're doing against those particular outcomes. So I want to just talk a little bit more now about the content of that so that you know what you're looking at when you're looking at the details. So we're presenting this as what we call the wireframe. So the frame upon which all of the detail is added. So if we were looking at outcome 1, the design healthy, sustainable meals, what you'll find is there are a number of elements. So there's headings that are in bold that are shown as on the screen. So under the knowledge side, the headings are nutrition, food, information and data, food safety, business, and maths. So there's some theory about nutrition, which clearly they will need to be able to design a meal. There's some theory about food, because they'll need to know about food to be able to design a meal. There's content about information and data so that they know where to look for information to help them design healthy, sustainable meals, and also how to present healthy, sustainable meals. There's the food safety theory that they need in order to be able to consider what might be their healthy, sustainable meal that they need to think about. Business, because clearly no person that's involved commercially in designing healthy, sustainable meals is going to want to do that without a kind of business perspective. And then there'll be some technical knowledge around the use of maths that they need to be able to consider as well. So that's the knowledge, which all adds up to them being able to design healthy, sustainable meals. And then the skills, so they need creativity. So they need to think of ideas. This isn't about them copying something. This is about them designing. And when we're saying creativity and design, we don't mean art. We mean creativity in terms of their thinking, how they're linking ideas, how they're taking one idea and adapting it. That's about creativity. Thinking critically. So looking at, in the way, Chris, you were talking about, using their analytical techniques, their skills of analysing text to be able to think critically. What does this mean? What does this mean to me? What have I learned? How is that going to help inform what kind of meal that I'm designing for this particular individual need? About making decisions and the process that they go through. So as they're coming up with choices, the process they need to go through that gives them the skill of making decisions. Investigation skills. So it's not just that you're asking them to do the research, but you're showing them how to develop research skills. You're giving them opportunities to develop those skills, to develop the skills that mean that they can go into something like Google or another search engine and actually put in a really good defined search query rather than healthy, sustainable meals to meet specific individual needs, which is where students would normally start. So real skills about how you source your different things, how you reference your sources. Communication skills in terms of how you present that, what the writing skills and the speaking skills are. The numeracy skills, so that they're thinking about how they've actually thought about different aspects of nutrition, and the digital skills and how they present. So when you're looking at that, you can see how all of that content holistically adds up to meeting that design requirement, how the content doesn't need to be separated from that. Now, you might find that content and you might do mapping of a qualification and find that content in a qualification that you want to deliver. But what you have to ensure is if that content is all over the qualification, you must bring it together to enable the students to demonstrate the outcome. The outcome, the assessment for the qualification could well be different to the outcome from these NTOs. Possibly for the preparation and cooking, it's the same, as long as it's healthy, sustainable dishes So if it's about cooking a Victoria sandwich and a fish and chips, it's probably not going to meet the outcome. So thinking about, therefore, if you're using a qualification, how you're ensuring that what it is that they're preparing and cooking for outcome 2 and 3 meets those requirements, but also checking the content that is in the NTOs to be able to cover that. So the idea of having a wireframe is so that you can see the big picture and start some mapping, but ideally to start looking, not having chosen the qualification, but look at the range of qualifications. So have a look on the Ofqual register at the range of qualifications that are available at level 2 or even level 3. Why not have transition program students doing some level 3 content? And it may be they don't have to do a whole qual, they can do a unit and get some unit accreditation. So thinking more broadly about what qualification might mean to these young people in terms of their progression. In terms of getting a job, employers are more interested in the English and maths, and they don't necessarily know the difference between something like a BTEC unit at level 3 and a City and Guilds level 2 diploma or certificate or award. So think about what that might mean. And maybe also having qualifications like a food safety qualification, like a first aid qualification, and having those as something separate might be something that's more interest of an employer if the students are then going to change their mind and not go on to a T level, is something to think about. So we'd normally now be talking about teaching and learning. We spent a lot of time talking about the kind of structure of the qual, but also you were coming up with some really good ideas around teaching and learning. So it's important to think about that kind of teaching and learning process as separate to the formative assessment and what you're going to get them to do to show that they can design. But think about the importance of how you might deliver that content in ways that brings in those wider skills, which typically when we're working towards a qualification, we're not thinking about how can I get them to be more resilient when I'm getting them to do this link? How can I get them to be more collaborative? How can I get them to really open up and be more self-confident? So if we're working towards a qualification, we're not necessarily bringing in the wider aspects of the transition program, which make them much better learners and actually make them more employable if we can use that approach. So consider how you might use that for teaching and learning when you're looking at these. And just, we won't have time to do the activity, but just to point out about the section that you've got in your NTO document that's covering breadth and depth. So this is there for you to provide stretch and challenge opportunities. So this is if you've got students that are demonstrating that actually they need the challenge, that they are already starting to show towards the middle and end of the program that they are becoming level 3 learners, you might want to stretch them and really enable them to start learning level 3 content or learning level 3 contexts and kind of skills. The idea of the breadth is to focus on them continuing their learning at the same level, but broaden that learning. So typically what we're looking at here is that they're applying what they've learned to new situations and contexts. Now, this statement on this slide is really important because this reflects the assessment objective that's on the T level. So the T level requires them to apply knowledge and understanding to new situations and contexts. So this means that on the T level, they have to go beyond regurgitating a textbook. They have to be able to really understand the concepts and theories and principles that they've been learning and see how they can be applied in different situations. So the idea of breadth is to introduce them to new situations so that they can see how the content they've been learning can be applied in those different situations. So that's part of the preparing them for the T level. So the breadth, keeping them at the same level, but getting them to apply. When we look at depth, this is about moving them on in their thinking. This is about the higher taxonomy. So it's about analysing information and ideas from across the context in order to draw conclusions and make judgments. So again, this is an assessment objective on the T level. So using that, bringing that in with students probably towards the end of their second or third term, is where you're starting to prepare them for the T level, where you're starting to see to what extent are they ready for their T level? Are they ready to start using these skills? Now, many students, when they start the T level, they're not going to be able to apply and they're not going to be able to analyse information and ideas. But bringing this in as part of your transition programme enables the student to see what the T level will require of them, and you can see how they start to respond. So this is about the potential to bring in opportunities. Now, this isn't about just asking them to analyse something or evaluate something. It's not about a kind of exam question that starts with analyse or evaluate. It's analyse information and ideas. So Chris, it's a bit like analyse that poetry, but analyse this information, but in order to draw conclusions and make judgments. So it's about giving them information that they can analyse and evaluate. So here's an article. Let's read that article. Here's a profile about an individual that's got lots of information about the individual. Can you analyse and evaluate that information, and from that work out what the individual's needs are in terms of their diet and in terms of this particular meal? So this is about taking that stretch and moving them into level 3. So the content in your NTOs, the bit that's underneath each of the outcomes, that's your minimum content that's mandatory. The bit that's in the depth and breadth is optional, and that's where you can then start to have an individualized curriculum for your students, because you might have some students where you want to give them that kind of open profile, but you've got other students where you need to give them something very specific and keep it as level 2. So the difference between level 2 and level 3, level 2 is very much about routine, straightforward, familiar. Level 3, you're starting to bring in something that's unexpected, unfamiliar, not so routine, a little bit of complexity. So the idea is they have to work things out for themselves. Level 2, you're making it really clear what the expectations are. So when you're looking at your content, have a look at that, because that's where you can kind of really bring in some of the wider aspects of the transition programme. So I just want to talk to you about next steps. So Sarah's already talked about some of the broader offer. Okay, so these next steps are about the technical focus groups that we've got planned. So our next technical focus groups are going to happen in January and February. So they're either the last week of January or the first 2 weeks of February, as you can see on the slide. These are all face-to-face, so they're not online meetings. We aren't really going to record them because they're all-day events, but we will find a way for those who aren't able to attend of putting up a kind of summary of the key outputs that come from the event. So they're face-to-face, and we're organising them on a regional basis. So you can see where we've got events that are definitely planned and who's going to host those events. And we've got a couple where we're still looking for hosts. So if you're interested in hosting an event, then contact Abby or Sarah or your advisor, because I'm sure they'd be pleased to hear from you. And this would mean having other people that are coming in and sharing their experiences. So the whole idea is that they're regional to give you more accessibility to you, so that hopefully you don't have too far to travel, and therefore you're more likely to engage in them. They're all-day events. Will be available from 9:30. They'll start at 10 and they'll finish at 4, but we'll also be available after. And the whole idea really is we're not making them route specific. So there will also be people there from other routes. So it doesn't matter if there's only 2 people from catering, because you'll have an opportunity to speak to people from catering, but you'll also have an opportunity to speak more widely and find out more about, as Sarah was talking about, what other people are doing with their transition programme, because what people are doing with construction could have relevance to catering. What people are doing with engineering can have relevance to catering. So it's an opportunity to network, find out what other people are doing, find other people's names, but also for you to be able to focus. And we're going to really drill down into these NTOs and focus on them a lot more and think about what they might involve. And some of that will be involving looking at the bigger program as well. So you've got the slide there. And as Abby was talking about in the chat, you can also if you use your camera on here, the QR code will take you to the link as well. So when you get the slide deck, if you missed it in the chat, you'll be able to get it from the slide deck because you can scan the QR code that's on there. So they're going to happen around January, February, so that you can really get your head around the NTOs and start thinking about what does this mean for the bigger program. And then to help you with finalizing your planning, we've got another set of events that will be taking place in June. So this is much more about the holistic delivery. So once you've focused on your technical content, we're then going to start looking at how you can bring in the kind of maths, English, digital skills, but also those other core skills, knowledge and behaviours that are in that kind of donut aspect of the delivery framework. So those will be happening in June. They're also going to be face-to-face, and they're also going to be regional. So if you are willing to host an event, you don't think you can do it in January, February, but you can in June. And for me, the thought of going to Bournemouth in June, I'm up for that. So if you don't want to do that on the 31st of January, I do like the seaside in the winter, but I'm sure it's very nice in June as well. Although others that are here, North Lindsey, I'm sure, is fantastic as well at any time of the year. So whoever's out there, if you're willing to host an event, then let us know. We're really keen to have them spread across the country to make them much more accessible to people. So also pointing out to you, there is a Padlet resource. I think Abby, if she hasn't already, will be putting the link to Padlet. And again, the QR code should link you to that. But Padlet's the resource where we'll put all of these outputs. So this is where the recording will be. From the January, February events, it's where we'll have the outputs because people are going to be coming up with ideas for assessment, ideas for teaching and learning, ideas for projects that are all going to be coming up, and we'll put all of those on the Padlet as well. The notes that Sarah's been taking, the questions that you've been asking in the chat and that you've been asking of us, all of those are going to come together in a frequently asked questions document. We've got 11 of these events that are coming up. So across the 11 events, we're collating all the questions that have been coming up, putting them on frequently asked questions. So the questions you didn't think to ask or you thought to ask, but you didn't want to ask may well have already been asked. They'll be on the frequently asked questions. And also over the last couple of years, we've been developing quite a lot of guidance resources. So some of those resources are about developing delivery models, developing teaching and learning activities, preparing students for the workplace, a whole range of things that look at the wider aspects of the transition programme. And colleagues have also been going out and interviewing and speaking to people that are in providers that are delivering the transition programme, and they've been talking, having video clips about what they've learned from delivering their transition programme. So there are also guidance resources there. So as well as your advisors, there's lots of support that's available through the Padlet and through other resources, and we'll make sure that the links are available to you when an email with all the resources is going out in the future. So what I now want you to just think about is your action planning from today, okay? Please, if there's other questions that are coming up, use the chat. We're available after this. But what I want you to think about now, I'm going to ask each of you to tell me something about your personal action planning. Who is the first person you need to speak to within your organisation? So is there somebody within your organisation that, based on what we've been speaking about today, you want to speak to? So that might be your curriculum lead if you're not the curriculum lead. It might be somebody from the SLT that's responsible for curriculum. It might be someone who can tell you who your T-level lead is because you don't know who it is. It might be your T-level lead. It might be somebody in your team who you think is likely to go and be delivering the transition programme with you or instead of you. Is there a document you need to read? So we've talked about the framework for delivery. We've talked about the MTOs. I've also talked about the outline content for the T-level in catering. But it might be that you've not yet had the opportunity to read either of the two very important documents relating to the transition programme, and you might want to read those. And what's going to be your first action? your first action might be to speak to somebody or to read something, but it might be something else. It might be, I'm going to look on the Ofqual register and see what qualifications are available for level 2 in catering, or in level 3 in catering, or in something else. So think about what that is. Whilst you're thinking, you should find that there's a poll on the screen. We're doing that to give you time, so that you can, as you're thinking, maybe put in the poll. There are a couple of questions on there that we're looking for you to answer. And if you can just answer on that poll, it's anonymous, so we don't know who said it was awful or who said it's really useful, but it's really helpful for us to get that kind of immediate feedback. So fill in the poll, think about your personal action planning. The best thing to do is fill in the poll so it disappears and you can look at the screen that says, what is it you need to do about personal action planning? The first thing that I want you to do is, in the chat, can you each tell me who is the first person you are going to speak to within your organisation? So can you use the chat to tell me who it is that you're going to speak to? Oh, Danielle, you're speaking to a few people, right? Okay. Oh, and this afternoon, great, thanks. The learning manager, thanks for that. Head of department and quality lead. Yeah, but the quality leads, the AOC are working with those to kind of look at what the transition programme means in terms of quality, because obviously if the qualification isn't there, or it's only a small qualification, then the quality manager could well be looking for something else and knowing what that data is. Okay. Catering team meeting tonight. I'm glad we chose, Danielle, the right day for you then, in terms of fitting in with your catering team meeting. Wouldn't it be awful if this was tomorrow instead and you just missed that opportunity? So that's great. Brilliant. Yeah. Anybody else who you're going to be speaking to? Okay. Anybody going to tell me which document they're going to read? Anybody willing to come on mic and say which document you're going to read? Who's got the reactions button where you can put a thumbs up? I'm not going to ask you to speak if you've got the thumbs up. I'm just interested in me having another poll. Have you all got the reactions button? Can you find the reactions button? Laura, you can. Okay. Danielle, can you find the poll, the hands up button? Chris, you can. David, are you there? Shane, are you there? Haven't heard from you, so I'm not sure if you're there and you're listening. We've just got this on in the background.
No, we're here. We're here.
Brilliant. Just wondered if you have actually read the framework for delivery. There's no judgment if not.
I haven't.
I
haven't yet. No, this is my
first
port of call.
introduction.
Yeah, it is,
Yeah.
to be fair. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Chris, have you read the framework for delivery?
Yes, I have. Yes, I've read through that and the presentation before the meeting.
Brilliant. Okay.
I followed the link that took us to the Gov site as well.
Excellent. Thank you.
Gold star for you, Chris.
Yes.
Well, Elise, is this regardless of awarding body that you're going to go with, or the college has chosen to go with?
Absolutely.
This applies to whichever one we go with. Is that right?
So the awarding body is the qualification. Okay, so the program, the transition program, and the qualification you may choose to have within it are two separate things. Okay, so there's no transition program qualification at the moment. So you choosing a qualification is up to you. So there's the program, and if you want a qualification, you can choose it from any awarding body, as long as it doesn't even have to be a funded qualification, I don't think. It's a qualification that you choose. If you wanted to, you could create a qualification and you can give your own college certificate at the end of it. Entirely up to you. Entirely up to you. Yeah. Anybody else read the framework for delivery? Anybody else? Anybody read the NTOs before today and really looked at them? Great, thanks, Debbie. Quick look at it. Okay. So I think it would be fantastic if I was able to see you at the face-to-face events. I'm not actually at all of them. I'm in the Midlands and the South, not at the North. But I'd love to be able to see you and look at these in more detail. But I would suggest that between now and those events, get your head around the programme. As people have already said, speak to your senior leaders, the curriculum lead or your transition lead, your T-level lead, your quality manager, your overall college curriculum lead. Get some insight into what their thinking is around where transition programmes are within their curriculum offer, where it stands. Have a chance to look at the NTOs, but really start to look at them as the outcome and what the outcome means to you and how you're going to deliver the outcome, because that's what we're going to focus on when we have that meeting in January. So there's a lot more opportunity to really get at those NTOs and think about what they mean and look at those before you start choosing your qualification. And then you can go with any awarding body. I know that you'll be limited within the college, because obviously if you're working with a brand new awarding body, there's a whole range of work to be done. And then there's the dealing with a new EQA and all of that kind of thing. But definitely think about what we're finding is good practices, small qual, 240 maximum, and using the time to really develop the learning. Rich learning is about learning for the transition programme, not about assessment. So a 240 is worth 2 GCSEs. Their English and maths is another 2 GCSEs. If you think most students, even look at your level 2 students that you've got now, just have a quick look at the profile. How many of them have got a GCSE at grade 4 and 5? And you'll probably find that the majority of them have got a GCSE at grade 4 or 5. So with a 2 GCSE equivalent qual, English and maths, and what they've already got 5 GCSEs, which is probably what you're looking for to get onto a T level. So you don't need it to be more than that. If you need it to be more than that, you're making it worse to spend a year with you than if they came straight from school. So once you know what size of qual you need to work for, have a look at what's available with the awarding organisations your college wants you to work with, and then see to what extent their range of qualifications best matches the NTOs. But it's worth looking at the GCSE, because the benefit of the GCSE, it includes an exam, so you're preparing them for a T-level assessment, and it includes a practical, so you're preparing them for the T-level assessment as well. It's only one GCSE, but it is something that you can have, and then perhaps another one GCSE, an award or something like that, that you can add alongside. So there's lots of opportunity to be really creative in terms of how you put together your programme. Thank you for filling in the feedback survey. Thank you very much. And thank you, because for most of you, that has been really good. Okay, so great. We didn't have workshops particularly. Sorry, you've had to mainly listen to me and read what Sarah's been putting in, but hopefully from the survey results, you've said that they are, you have found it useful. So thank you for that. If anybody wants to ask questions, I'm happy to stay on the call and help. If not, I hope I get to see you in January. If not me, you'll see one of my colleagues. There'll be other AOC advisors there, so they'll also be able to talk to you about other providers that might be able to help with questions that you've got. But thank you. And
sorry, Elise, somebody's put in the chat that they not in the chat, on the poll, that they don't feel at all confident about planning. So I don't know if you want to stay on the line. Obviously it's totally anonymous, but if you want to stay on the line and have a chat, then please feel free to do so.
Thanks, and thanks,
Thank
Debbie.
you. Thank you
Found
very
that
much.
in the reactions button as well. So we had some fizz earlier. Clapping, thank you. Yeah, so thanks everyone. Hopefully see you again. Have a good Christmas break. Thank you.